Hello, everyone, and welcome to Totaljobs' second Hiring Trends Coffee Briefing. I'm Isa, Account Director at Totaljobs, and I focus on delivering transformative global recruitment solutions and insights, and working with employers to understand their talent acquisition goals so that I can provide tailored solutions that will deliver the best outcomes for them. Today's event is a chance for you to grab a drink and a snack and dive into the recruitment trends of today and in the months to come, with a focus on workplace well-being and the impact this has on your staff and retention. Some of you may know that it's Mental Health Awareness Week, which is an annual event where we're all invited to focus on our mental health. So there's really no better time for today's session. Thanks to everyone who's already submitted a question when signing up for this webinar. We always aim for our sessions to be informative and to include actionable advice to help you navigate through the current market challenges. With that in mind, please do drop your questions into the chat box below throughout the session, and we'll do our best to get to them. Any we don't get to, we will do our best to follow up on over email. So a bit of housekeeping before I tell you more about our Hiring Trends Index and our guest today. The webinar is recorded and you will get a copy of the recording in an email after the webinar. So let's get to it. So our Hiring Trends Index is a quarterly report on emerging trends, challenges and opportunities within the recruitment market. Our latest edition looks back at Q1 this year and looks ahead to what's to come for the rest of Q2. It draws insights from a survey of 1,000 HR leaders from across the UK. And for this edition, we also surveyed 2,500 UK workers for their insight. So today's session is going to draw out some of the key trends from this research, from hiring confidence to the steps that employers are taking to retain their staff. And I'm also excited to be spotlighting employee wellbeing in this session, and I'm thrilled to be joined by some brilliant experts on our panel. So if we take a look at the first 3 months of the year, what does this picture look like? Of the businesses we surveyed, 76% recruited in Q1 this year. And of this group, 41% increased their hiring, and this was actually up from 38% in Q4 last year. The roles most likely to be recruited for were operations, IT and tech, and sales roles. And the industries most likely to have increased recruitment were hospitality and leisure at 52%, retail at 46%, and media, marketing, and sales type and communication type roles, and that was at 45%. We saw that 10% had actually paused recruitment at some point in the last 3 months, and this was down from 14% that had done that in Q4. We also saw that 6% had decreased recruitment, and this was a figure that held from Q4. Interestingly, 21% of the businesses surveyed saw an increase in hours worked, which is quite a significant number, I think, compared to only 9% who reported a reduction. So how about recruitment in Q2? So for April to June, we've seen that 53% of businesses are confident they'll recruit the people they need in Q2. And this is very close to the 54% that we saw in Q4. Industries with the most confidence in recruiting the people they need in Q2 are finance and accounting, IT and telecoms, and education. Almost a third of businesses, 30%, plan to increase their recruitment before the end of June, with 26% investing further into finding the right people for their specialist roles. This is compared to 13% increase in investment into non-specialist recruitment. Industries most likely to increase recruitment in Q2 include the medical and health sector. Again, we see media, marketing, sales and comms type roles, and we also see hospitality and leisure, which is really fantastic to see. With recruitment need continuing to be high, businesses will also need to be assessing how effective their employer brand is in today's competitive market. So I'm excited to hear more from our panel shortly on how to externalize your workplace culture, with well-being at the heart of that as part of our discussion. And of course, don't forget, here at Totaljobs, our employer brand experts Universum offer a powerful range of solutions to help you build and evolve a strong employer brand. And this can range from an engaging visual identity to a compelling value proposition, all driven by insights that connect your brand with the people you need. So if we take a look now at more of the key takeaways from the report, we can see that employers face the continued challenge of plug-in skill shortages as businesses continue to be impacted by a lengthy time to hire and staff absence as they try to replace lost staff. Retaining staff, skill shortages and labour shortages continue to be the top three challenges highlighted by employers, and they all kind of came in at the high 20s, sort of 28% and thereabouts in our responses. Based on the responses we received, we calculated a mean time to hire for Q1 at just over 6 weeks, and this is compared to just over 4 weeks reported in Q4, so quite a significant move there. So with a stretched time to hire, we know many recruiters are focusing on shortening that process and boosting their chances of engaging with qualified candidates during an interview. You may have even experienced ghosting, where candidates confirm their attendance to an interview, but then cancel or don't show up at all. In today's candidate market, we're hearing more stories of candidates turning down one opportunity or one interview opportunity for another. With that in mind, we did recently ask candidates about their approach to interviews. We found that 43% say they are more likely to attend an interview via video call rather than in person. It's more convenient and means that they're not taking as much time out of their day to travel to an interview. Just so you're aware, 31% didn't express a preference. Almost 2/5 said they feel more comfortable interviewing over video than in person, and we've all been there. Being interviewed can be incredibly nerve-wracking, so it's really no surprise that doing this in the comfort of your own home is going to be the preference for most people, or for many people. 26% of our respondents didn't express a preference here. So we also know that over half of businesses report that switching to video interviews has sped up their time to hire. And for those that aren't aware, please do look at our video recruitment solution, which helps recruiters and hiring managers to use the magic of video to engage candidates and speed up your time to hire. We have a selection of tools, including competency-based reports that allow recruiters to assess candidates following either live interviews or automated interviews, where candidates can answer predetermined questions and accelerate the screening process. So moving on now, looking at mental health in the workplace. The impact of long-term skill shortages is also being felt by workers, with 2/5, which was 38%, as you can see, of UK workers reporting that their workload is unmanageable because of staff shortages in their team. Other factors affecting people's mental health at work include a lack of wellbeing support, coupled with the added stress of financial worries given the rising cost of living and the impact that this is having on salaries. Very significantly, 78% of workers reported experiencing at least one symptom of burnout since the start of the year. In fact, 40% say that their job has been the biggest factor negatively impacting their well-being this year. With that in mind, it is no surprise that this would hold sway in a decision to look for a job elsewhere. So 36% have said that their stress levels would play a part in their decision to leave a job. In the Q4 edition of the Hiring Trends Index, the majority, 69% of businesses reported they increased their focus on staff well-being in 2021. And over a third, which was at 36%, expected this to increase further in 2022. Our latest Q1 research shows that a quarter of HR leaders are concerned about the well-being of their staff, but only 17% are planning to offer more well-being support this quarter than previously. Just over a third, at 35%, will be offering the same level that they always have. A positive here was that only 8% said they were actively going to be reducing the well-being support they offered staff this quarter. With so much going on in the world at the moment and the added pressure of high workloads due to open vacancies and staff absence, alongside anxiety around rising living costs, well-being support may well need to look a little different in the coming months. Meanwhile, staff want to see more action taken when it comes to their mental health and well-being at work. We're going to discuss some of these solutions in more depth during the panel, but at this point, I do want to draw your attention to the fact that 46% of employees say that they want their employer to make additional hires in order to improve their workload. That's a lot of people who believe that this would benefit their well-being more than other initiatives. So a combined effort is needed here to create a work culture that enables a more open, honest conversations about mental health at work, as well as a clear strategy on externalizing this. So I'm delighted now to welcome our guests who are joining me on today's webinar. So we're going to dig into these topics in more detail. Guys, if you can all just please turn your cameras and mics on. Great to see you all. So Simon, I'm going to go over to you first and just ask you to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you and the work that you do.
Sure. My name's Simon Blake. I'm the Chief Executive of Mental Health First Aid England. We're a social enterprise that does training and education in the workplace. I also chair the Support After Suicide Partnership, which provides specific support to membership who provide specific support after suicide, bereavement, and the Headspace International Advisory Board.
Thanks very much, Simon. Over to you, Debbie.
Yeah, so Debbie Bullock, I work for Aviva, the insurance, pension, wealth investment organisation, as Wellbeing lead. So responsible for our internal wellbeing programme for colleagues across the UK, Canada and Ireland. Yeah, so that's me sitting the people function with a wellbeing focus.
Brilliant. Thanks, Debbie. And Lee, just introduce yourself for us, please.
Yep, a pleasure to be with you this morning. I'm Lee Chambers. I'm a business psychologist and founder of Essentialise Workplace Wellbeing, and we assist a range of companies with wellbeing strategy design and delivery of bespoke wellbeing interventions and programs.
Fantastic. Thank you all, and welcome to the panel. So I'm going to start with you, Debbie, if I can. As an employer, what role do you see your business playing in ensuring the overall well-being of your employees?
Employers play the same. I always describe the wellbeing role employers play as part of a three-legged stool. So the role has, with all three legs, it's sustainable. You can sit on it for a long time. Any less, and it's kind of not going to be as effective. And those three legs are personal accountability of the individual, the benefits an organisation can offer, and the culture of an organisation. So bringing all those parts together, the employer can play a big role in supporting people to take control of their own well-being by creating the right culture and providing the right benefits to do that. And it makes commercial sense to do so from an employer's perspective, and that's the key. Because if you've got happy, well, colleagues and employees, you will have more productive employees. So you will be losing less days to presenteeism and absenteeism. And as a result, your business performance should grow. So it's crucial to the business commercially to do so.
Fantastic. So a happy, well-being, happy sort of healthy workforce leads to productivity and the bottom line ultimately.
Yeah.
Lee, would you have anything to add to that at all?
Yeah, so I think the idea about a company looking at it strategically and ensuring that they're looking at both the barriers to well-being and how they can influence those, and also the opportunities to amplify well-being through health promotion and different aspects. A business can really grab hold of some of those and, really create an engaging opportunity for employees to really take more, ownership over their own health outcomes, and obviously presenting those opportunities within the workplace and building the underlying culture and community that continues to propagate that message, really gets to a point where it can actually start to influence a business's wider perspective and, like obviously we're here today, become a real talent acquisition, retention and attraction magnet in a lot of ways.
Okay, so sort of multiple effect there. Simon, do you have anything to add there?
I think the really important thing to start with is, of course, that work done well is good for us. And we get quite often dragged very quickly into work is stressful. And we know that people spend an awful lot of time at work. And so when it's not done well, it is stressful. And we know that the rising costs of poor mental health in the workplace was last estimated at 45 billion. And that was before the pandemic, which we know will also have had a wider hit. So there is a real obvious sort of sense about why we must focus on this, but it is important, I think, to remember that work done well is good for us, and that what we've got to try to do as part of that is to make sure that we are helping employees to lead balanced lives that work fits into. And we spend so much of our time digitally connected, always on, and so often when we start talking about mental health and well-being, we talk about it as if it's separate to productivity. And I think the point that Debbie makes is really important. You know, well-being and productivity fuel each other. It isn't one or the other. They go together. It's not a seesaw. It's a, you know, Bunsen burner under both of them, and they really support one another. But I do think it's just also really important to do exactly as Debbie said about personal responsibility. The employer can do so much, and we have to, as part of that, be really clear that we all have personal accountability and responsibility as well.
I love that. Brilliant.
And I just need to add as well that about work being good for you. Work should have a net positive impact on your overall well-being, not a net negative impact. So, because coming to work, earning money, having purpose, all of those things can have a positive impact on your well-being. So it's really important that employers make sure that being at work doesn't have a net negative impact on well-being, particularly mental well-being. It should have a net positive impact, and that's what organisations should aim for.
Thanks so much for that. And just to kind of take the conversation forward a little bit, you've mentioned how important, you've all mentioned how important it is for well-being to be prioritised within the place of work and how beneficial it is. Lee, how do you incorporate wellness and mental health support into a workplace, and how do you create an environment where well-being is prioritised?
Yeah, so I think so often a big opportunity kind of stands around strategy, around being able to really see where you're currently at, what you currently provide, the current challenges that your employees face, and some of the sector and industry challenges that you might face as well. And obviously the benefits of looking at it strategically kind of helps to align it to other business processes. It really helps to identify those opportunities, but it does also help to define where responsibility lies across different provisions and all the way down to the employees themselves. And obviously a strategy can look at the different pillars of well-being that can be, you know, amplified through workplace initiatives, and also can really start to look, you know, whether that be mental, physical, social, emotional, financial, and really start to see where those interlink and where the benefits can be, you know, joined, because quite often we sometimes look at well-being as something that's quite individualized, but actually it can be a lot more collaborative than we expect. Obviously, part of that strategy as well is to help really look at it and create a sustainable business case, because that's so often the kind of the commercial aspect towards it. That sustainable business case does require that we're looking at, you know, where we're starting, where we're looking to go, how we define well-being as an organisation, and really being able to, you know, create a message that is compelling to engage employees in that process and really help them see beyond the benefits, but actually what is going to be the greater impact to them. And obviously, again, part of that is to really start to look at how leadership then can model that and facilitate those discussions, how employees can feel that value, appreciation and ability to participate. Because obviously some well-being is employee-led, some is employer-led. And obviously, as you look to try and embed that within a community and a culture and really see, again, what the barriers to well-being might be around workload, clarity of role, and specific challenges that you might have, it really starts to, again, become something that you can do strategically, you can evolve it over time, and it really helps to be able to see, you know, where the opportunities lie, both the smaller things that you can do sometimes without budget, and some of the bigger projects that allow you to then amplify that across the organisation.
Thank you, fantastic. Simon, do you have anything to add there?
I think it's really important that the point you made, I think it was 46% of people said one of the biggest things that would impact their well-being is having more staff. And so for me, you can't not incorporate well-being and mental health into the workplace where one is largely about resourcing capacity and about relationships. Yes, it's really important to have the training. Yes, it's really important to have line managers who can connect, engage and focus on well-being. But so much of this, the core part of it is my job purposeful? Can I see why I'm doing it? Do I have the time to do it and the tools and resources to do it? And do I have the relationships? Now, if we haven't got those things in place, well, and of course there'll be busy months and there might be some weeks you have to stay up really late. I'm not saying that we never have to do those things, but if we don't have the core sense that the job is purposeful and it's possible to do it, then everything else becomes, you know, really just sticking plasters. And I think the other thing which you just say is that so often the senior leadership believe that there is a strategy for well-being in place, and that's communicated. And where it falls down is, of course, where you've got line managers who don't have the training and support to be able to talk about well-being, or to have the courageous conversations that are necessary, which are also part of well-being. So the Chartered Management Institute said less than 50% of line managers have had training around mental health and well-being. And we did some research for earlier this year, which showed that 50% of people have not had meaningful conversations about their well-being in the last year. Now, that's quite extraordinary at a time when we know well-being has been tested. So for me, I think it's about job design. How can you run a business if you don't actually think about people's well-being at the heart of it? And if we are thinking about projects and initiatives without that core base, we'll be tinkering around the edges.
Totally supportive, Simon. We build it into our organisational design function within the people function and our business architecture function for a job to have purpose, clear accountabilities, empowerment, and a generally sustainable workload. And without that underpinning anything, the wellbeing benefits and, you know, the showy stuff won't land. So you need that core underpinning culture of psychological safety and those core things. Daniel Pink did a great piece on meaning, mastery and autonomy. So if you haven't read his work on that, that's definitely worth a read for those listening, because that really talks about what makes people stay in role more than cash and benefits and things like that. That's meaning, mastery and autonomy, and that plays to underpinning well-being as well.
Fantastic, yeah.
So I just add one other bit, sorry, Isa, which is around equity. That if you believe other people are being paid more for doing the same job, if you believe other people are getting more opportunities or getting greater recognition, these are all things that are going to impact on your mental health. So there's something about thinking about mental health as the organising framework. You know, does all of our activity support that net positive that Debbie talked about? And so often we think about these things in boxes, and it feels to me as though somehow we've got to be able to bring them all together, because, you know, I know that one of the greatest things that's caused dissatisfaction for me and for others is when you believe people are getting more money and more credit for the same effort or less. And these are all part of our wellbeing at work approaches.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that, Simon, because it leads me to think of the quote from Debbie, actually, that says that you can't have D, E, and I, the diversity and inclusion, without that well-being piece, that it all ties in together. So, yeah, absolutely agree with that. And in terms of attraction, we've spoken about the importance of attracting new staff, and the fact that 46% of our respondents see that as critical to their well-being. Is that something, is well-being support something that you actually highlight as part of your attraction strategy? And if so, what would be the reasons, Simon?
Unsurprisingly, perhaps, given we're a mental health organisation, a mental health social enterprise, it is part of that. But in some ways, we get perhaps a bit of a premium pass on it, because people are attracted to come to work for us because of our purpose and our mission, often either through their own personal experience or connection to mental health as a social justice issue. The flip side of that, of course, is that we also get no pass at all if we don't deliver on some of the things that they expect, and the bar might be slightly higher. But I think, you know, of course, my understanding from talking to recruiters is that, you know, with the market as it is, people are looking for both the financial benefits and the reward that comes with that, but also what does the package look like? And when you talk to the City Mental Health Alliance Young Professionals Network, what they say is we need to see that commitment, which is on paper, translates into commitment in action, and really seeing that. So from a talent perspective, I think it's coming from all directions, isn't it? The financial and the financial package, but also what does work look like and feel like, and do I feel cared about? And you know, Debbie talked about culture earlier, that sense of, do I feel cared about? isn't necessarily about doing more and more. And I do worry sometimes that it feels like we're always looking for the next thing that we might do, but rather, how do we live in this organisation? How does it feel to be here? Do you believe genuinely that you're cared for? And I think that's harder to communicate as part of your attraction package, but that's what we aim for, as part of it, for people to feel as though the interview process is designed in order, or selection process designed to enable people to show their best, and that's a reflection of how we want to run the business, which is set up in order for you to try to be able to deliver your best. But yeah, I mean, I did a quick look last night on some ads to see whether people were displaying it, and I think everybody's using slightly different language, but everybody's trying to say, we're the place to come and we'll look after you.
And I think the total jobs research is backed up by Aviva's ambiguity, which you can find research. We did some research called The Age of, find the various different elements of on aviva.com, but the age of ambiguity research suggested that people were looking for more than just the package. They wanted flexible working, being able to manage their work-life integration, so that it was an overall package, rather than specifically just cash and benefits. What is the culture like in an organisation? And that's increasingly becoming an important part, particularly post-pandemic, where people have taken the opportunity to reevaluate what's important to them. And no one's going to say, I wish I worked harder, when they finally leave this earth. So it's kind of getting flexible policies and support for carers, as well as that. All of that underpins well-being, as well as the work you do and the purpose. So it does form a vital part of an attraction strategy for an organisation. And I know we talk about our well-being and our culture as part of our recruitment and careers section on our website, and as part of our conversations with those populations.
Absolutely. And it's something that we here at Totaljobs actively encourage our recruiters to do as well. I mentioned Universum earlier, and we've seen some fantastic research that's come out of Universum about the drivers that candidates have, and the things that candidates are attracted to in a role. And it will so often, as you mentioned, Simon, you mentioned transparency of salary, but there are lots of other things relating to work-life balance that will really impact the attractiveness of your advert. So yeah, absolutely support that. Lee, do you have anything to add in there at all?
Yeah, I think what it comes down to quite often is really looking about how it's communicated and how an advert can be really brought to life. Obviously looking about how recruitment can become more inclusive, because that is a part of being able to generate those more expansive cultures. And obviously that goes all the way through the recruitment process. And I think sometimes that can be, if that is slightly neglected, it doesn't really generate that, I suppose, really compelling vision of where a company can go. But like Simon alluded to earlier, the next generation are incredibly curious and question about how purposeful organisations are. Is the vision and mission that's being communicated actually being lived and actioned on a daily basis? And are the things that they're saying they have achieved actually congruent with what's happening from the wider perspective? So, they are increasingly asking the questions, and obviously that is something that we need to consider when we're looking at that wider talent acquisition strategy.
Absolutely. And I'm just going to ask Ellie now if we've had any questions submitted by the audience.
Hi, Isa. Yeah, we've just got
Hi,
the
Ellie.
one for the moment, so I'll just read it out. So it says, if pressure is coming from workloads due to open vacancies in a team, what can managers or employers be doing in the meantime to help? Quite a big question.
Yeah, so I'm gonna have a bash at that to start with. I think one of the key things we talk about within Aviva is real strong, open conversations about prioritization. So if you don't understand what the clear priorities are for your team, or you've got a large workload because you've got staff shortages, you can speak to your manager or your manager's manager and find out what are actually, if we've got X number of work units available of time, where are the key priorities? If we haven't got the capacity to do everything, what is going to drive us towards what our organisational objectives or departmental objectives are, which should all ladder up anyway through a line of sight. So that real key prioritisation and accepting the whole list of, and not just moving it down the priority list either, but removing it quite often from a management point of view is a thing. Because if it's on the bottom of your to-do list, there are some people with a personality that still adds to the stress if it's on the list. So totally removing it is really important. So really strong, open conversations about prioritisation and whether you're making most use of your time focusing on the key tasks that need to be delivered. So there are tools out there that you can understand whether you're getting enough focus time. Are you spending too long in meetings? So you never get any time to do any actual work because you're in meetings all the time. So, what is the value of those, and trying to look at how often you're working outside of what you've decided are your working hours in a flexible arrangement. And as Simon said, there are peaks and troughs of work. There are times sometimes when that happens, but it needs to be generally sustainable. So really strong conversations on prioritisation with leaders and leaders of leaders, if necessary, to focus on what's going to drive the organisation strategy.
Brilliant. Thanks, Debbie. Would anyone else like to jump in?
Yes, I would 100% agree with that, and add that one of the things which we have started doing is talking about the sequencing of activity rather than what often you do your objectives for a year. We found that we then got into battles of, are we going to do it, or what's going to drop off, when actually things couldn't drop off, but some things could be done in 12 months time rather than in 6 months time. So just pushing them off and then removing them for now, but that sense of, okay, let's just think about all the things that need to be done and what sequence do they need to be done, and then what's the timeline that's attached to that, freed up some of that creativity, I think, to be able to plan and to feel. And I think if we know that we're running vacancy rates, and which some organisations are doing because recruitment is taking longer, how do you then factor into that slightly longer term sort of sense, or medium term, so that it's not always individual conversations, because what we know is people often talk less at the point they're most overwhelmed. So there's something about how do you build into cultures of strong conversations, but cultures of planning, which can be really important. And then finally, I think there's something for managers to have a really strong eye on who is always feeling overwhelmed and who is always putting their hand up and saying that they can do more, and how do we try to make sure that that people are working at the levels which you would expect. And just because Simon could do X before the pandemic, he may well have different responsibilities now, which mean that we had lots of conversations with people who had caring responsibilities or children through the pandemic, which meant that actually they couldn't do 2 reports a week, they could only do 1, and they might get to 1.5. And we had to have those sorts of conversations as well. What's happening outside work, which is influencing inside work as well, so that we're not just setting people up to fail because we expect them to be able to deliver as they always have.
Brilliant. Thank you, Simon.
Yeah, and just to again amplify the priorities aspect, the clarity of role, and I think in these situations, obviously, like has been alluded to, work sometimes is a bit like the sea. It comes in, the tide is pretty close, you're up against it, but the tide will have to go back out at some point, and we want to almost create work in those waves. But I think one thing that is massive in these situations is acknowledgement of the current situation, and having your employees appreciated for the fact that we are currently in this position where we are short on capacity and resource, and we appreciate that we're going to offer you and be able to try and streamline things as much as we can to see if there's any efficiencies we can achieve from our side, while also really keeping and amplifying the ability to check in on those, especially those people who tend to overperform, because in these situations they tend to step it up to unsustainable time points as well.
Fantastic. And I would just add to that from a Totaljobs perspective, but also as an ex-recruiter, automation is sort of creeping into so much of what we do, and it really is a powerful tool, I think, to help take away some of our workload. So, you know, again, looking at video hiring, if you can screen candidates whilst you're doing something else, if you can effectively have candidates, you know, going through a visual screening process that it can be shared with hiring managers, that can take a lot of time away from a recruiter's workload, and have a system automate those interviews. It can really take a lot of time away and then free up that recruiter to do other things. So I would say look at the tools that you have at your disposal and see how you can take some of your workload away as well. And just moving on to another question now. I'll come to you, Lee. How can a business make their employer brand stand out in today's market? And how can a business enable their EVP to shine throughout the recruitment process? I know you touched on it earlier, and I'd be keen to hear more from you.
Yeah, so I think obviously we're in what is a pretty candidate-led market. And I think especially in terms of well-being, over the past 2 years, expectations have risen, awareness has risen, and there's a lot more conversations, and obviously a lot more activity. What that does create is more expectations in an EVP around that cultural piece and what an employee is going to be able to generate beyond the benefits that are kind of listed. So they're looking for that, what would be, you know, some ways titled added value, but also that differentiation point. What is, you know, your kind of culture, and how can you really clearly communicate that and get that externally as well? And that's an exercise that many companies, you know, try to distill how they can communicate what they are, who they are, how they are, and why they exist into a pretty congruent message that can really hit, you know, potential candidates and the talent out there through that value proposition. Obviously, what's really important is you are able to amplify and distill that culture, but without health washing, greenwashing, or going beyond what you're actually achieving. What that does is sometimes I suggest that actually you go back inwards and really get something from your employees themselves to really kind of sense check your value proposition to ensure that it is, you know, rooted in reality, but is still really kind of propagating that desire and vision for the future. Like Debbie alluded to earlier, there's a massive thing around, you know, employee mobility and flexibility. That's something that's absolutely massive. It's a massive talking point when I'm talking to candidates, and it again ties massively into the wider well-being aspect. But there is something really kind of powerful about when current employees actually channel that, you know, employee value proposition and are actually able to say what it's actually like. They can quite often articulate it better than a company can themselves. But it's so important to be able to find a way to articulate that well, your points of difference, really what the impact is for employees coming working with you and how they can engage and be compelled into that wider journey, but just ensuring that you don't overamp it to a point where people arrive, you know, they're onboarded and then they're like, this isn't what I was promised, and this is beyond. Because again, the next generation are really willing to go to interview you as a company, and it's really interesting to see. But it's where we're heading to. Employers' expectations are higher. That experience is expected, and they want to be able to trust you. And trust is such a massive, pivotal part of both well-being and the employee experience for the future.
I think this is really interesting, Lee, and I'd love to sit in a cafe or somewhere and talk about it for hours, because I probably are going to fluff my words now. So apologies. I'm almost 50 and really keen that workplaces are amazing. And some of the things which I worry about in the new world is that we keep on offering more and more, but actually that doesn't lead to greater job satisfaction. It doesn't lead to greater development of skills. It doesn't lead to people who are willing and able to adapt and flex. And so there is something, and I don't think it's just the next generation, actually. I think it's all of us. And the pandemic might have amplified that. And yes, there's all sorts of things with I don't know, are we on millennials or X's or Z's or wherever we are right now? It's always shifting. But I think there is something about well-being at work doesn't mean that work will always make everything feel amazing every minute of every day, because work will be tough. You'll have tough conversations. Sometimes you'll be told you're not good enough. If you're lucky, someone will tell you honestly rather than wrap it up in all sorts of bits. And so for me, the word which you said in there was about authenticity and honesty. People have to trust you. And I worry we might be putting ourselves outside of an ability where you can actually say, this is the honest reality of work now. And so, for example, the flexibility piece, we've got a conversation with somebody at the moment who said, how do you know all those things? And the reality is I know all these things because I'm 25 years older, but also because I sat next to people who knew all those things and listened to them and overheard them and watched them and was able to be motivated by them. So I think we've got something which is going to be a challenge for us as we move into the new space, which is how do people learn from each other? How do people spar off each other in ways which they understand to be usual sparring and good for innovation and creativity? And how do we do that in a way which stays true to our values, which is about creating robust cultures, supporting well-being and being productive? And I know some of the hardest conversations that I ever had were only able to be had because somebody was willing to take a risk. And I worry that we may be pricing that out of some of the jobs at the moment in the ways that we put our EVP. As I say, I might fluff my words, you might be thinking, what's he on about? And it definitely is a longer conversation, but it's just there in the back of my mind all the time is where are we headed? Because I think if you were to say, did we notice what was happening over the last 20 years? No, we probably didn't on a day-to-day basis. But when you look back, work is so different now. I started work without an email address. So, I couldn't look on my phone when I went on holiday. I had to look in the notebook to see who'd phoned through and look in my trade, see who'd done the letters. And I haven't been going every day, what's happening, but you look back and it's unrecognisable. And I think we have to look forward to 20 years' time and go, where do we want to go so we can try and navigate there? Or we may end up in the wrong part of the sea because the wind's just blown us somewhere that we didn't expect to be blown.
Thank you very much, Simon. Absolutely valid points, really interesting points there, and maybe something to pick up at a later time as well. Just staying with you for a moment, Simon, in terms of the rising cost of living, we conducted some research and produced a report on that and the impact that the salary squeeze is having on employees very recently. How do you see that impacting staff or wellbeing strategy in the coming months?
I mean, you can feel it, can't you? You can hear it, you can see it. It's there in all of the coffee conversations. It's there in all of it. People talking about their gas and electricity bills, people talking about the cost of travel, people talking about how prep sandwiches have gone up. All of these things which are just there. And of course, that affects everybody. But if you're on a lower income, if you're living in London where everything is, I'm not saying costs are not rising outside London, but public transport or rent and all those sorts of things. So I think there's a brutal reality which is here at the moment. And as a third sector organisation, we gave cost of living allowance, which is in line with third sector organisations, but it's nowhere near in line with where we are in terms of inflation, or the Bank of England predicting will be above 10% later this year. So it's going to impact on people's well-being. Financial well-being is a core element of that. And I'd love to be in a position where we could give people at the lower end a lump sum, or everybody a cost of living lump sum rather than percentage rise to try to ease that. But we're just not there at the end of at this stage in the pandemic. So what we are doing is making sure that managers are having conversations with people about financial well-being as part of their conversations about how they're going to work. If somebody has to come in once a month or once a week rather than 3 or 4 days a week, that's obviously has an impact from travel, from lunches, from all those sorts of things. And we've also, financial well-being actually interestingly came up in our Great Places to Work survey last year as something that they wanted more input into. So we've done couple of sessions with experts around budgeting, planning, managing money, which have been well received and signposted then into other forms of support that exist, including the employee assistance program. But I think ultimately you can have the biggest impact when it comes to understanding how people work. And I think at the moment people's assumption is it's cheaper to work from home than it is to come into the office because of travel. But if you look now, you don't get the tax relief and bills have gone up. That may well change for people in the winter, but we don't know what that looks like. So I think it's about that constant honest conversation, and our first conversation in our one-to-ones is always about how people are, what they're doing to look after themselves, and money is increasingly coming into that conversation. I suspect that we will make that a formal part of it, because we can't, the bit which we'd love to do is to be able to respond by giving more money, but we know the impact of that, and that's a whole nother conversation, Bank of England's advice around cost of living, etc., etc. So yeah, it's the honest conversations, the trying to provide the help, trying to help people think about it, but building the conversations, the connections around flexibility so people can make choices that work best for them.
And I think one of the points you made there, Simon, about financial education is really important, because if you're lucky enough to have parents or family members who've given you the basics information, and you come into your first job and you know that kind of stuff, that's really helpful. But quite often that isn't the case, and while there is some money education in schools, it's probably not as good as we would all like. But simple budgeting, you might have a colleague who's telling you they're struggling with money, but they're getting Amazon packages delivered on a regular basis, and you're like, something's not quite right here in terms of you understanding, how to budget, what kind of source, and understanding credit, and how that works. So we do a lot at Aviva in terms of helping our employees, because there's also a misconception that if you work for a financial services company, you must know everything there is to know about that, which is not the case. So we do a lot around that, but also around life stage, because it's not just young people. You've got the squeeze sandwich generation who might be trying to help their kids at uni. They might have elder care responsibilities that they're trying to support, a big mortgage. And, so it's not just for those in the lower paid income streams that might need that kind of extra buzz and support. And also as people are approaching retirement, that's another trigger point for people to think about, well, what's that going to look like? Am I going to have enough money to afford to do the things that I want to do in retirement if I'm not earning the wage I'm currently earning now? So there's that element of life stage education as well as the basic education, and quite often your benefit provider, your pension provider, or there are other organisations out there that can help you with that if you haven't got it, just to give those colleagues a little bit more advice. And your EAP is a good place if you're in trouble, and charities out there like Step Change that can support on debt management if you are in that position, because if you've already got debt, the cost of living increase puts you in a sometimes even worse position. So that kind of emotional support, because while we talk about financial well-being, physical well-being and mental well-being, we all know on this panel, I'm sure many of those listening appreciate that actually we're one holistic person and they're all interlinked and related. If you're in financial distress, that's going to have an impact on your mental health and your physical health. If your mental health isn't in great shape, you might make the wrong financial decisions and so on. So it's all interconnected. So there's a lot organisations can do to signpost and support their people. But Simon's right, it starts with open conversations which come from trust and psychological safety.
Thanks very much, Debbie. Fantastic advice there. Lee, do you have anything that you'd like to add there at all?
I mean, I must say, between Simon and Debbie, they pretty much covered every point we could possibly unwrap on financial well-being. But again, it's that point where it is interconnected. And just to reinforce, the education piece is so valuable. And when people feel that little bit more empowered with their financial choices and a little bit more aware, we live in a world of, buy now, pay later schemes and so many different things that have kind of come into technology and are much quicker to process than they used to be. It's just being able to see some of those barriers and challenges and just give employees just a little bit more awareness around those and an ability to consider the support that they can access if they need to, because financial well-being itself can be a barrier to really accelerating in the other pillars too.
Absolutely.
And can I just add also to Isa, sorry, just as Debbie was talking, it reminds me that part of that financial education has to include debt and what happens, the cumulative impact of debt. And if we assume that most people have some debt, now is the time when that debt becomes problematic, for some people. And there's so much help is available. My brother died a few years ago, and we found this enormous sort of financial mess, and it had started very small, and it had just accumulated. And when we were getting some help for it, that was the key thing people said, is it starts little and that very quickly becomes big. And I think we must have those conversations as part of it too.
Yeah, such pertinent advice at times like this. Thank you all so much for that. I'm going to squeeze in one final question. It's going to be a quick fire question here. I'm going to come to you on this, Debbie. We know from the research that workload is playing a role in people's stress levels at work, on top of wider global events that undoubtedly will also have an impact on people's mental health. So we've already spoken about the benefits or perks that employers can implement, but what are the basics do you think many employers may still be getting wrong when it comes to mental health at work?
I think that brings us back to the topics that we've covered at the start of the conversation around purpose, about meaning, about clear priorities. So clear accountabilities and empowerment, because that creates that underpinning of well-being, equity and the psychological contract an individual might have with their workplace, in terms of what they're expecting to get and what they do get from it. And generally sustainable workloads. And all of those things in theory cost nothing to an organisation to implement as part of their culture, getting that basic right. Underpinning that with good policies, on sensible policies that work for the company, the customer and the individual employee. All of that's got to underpin. And some people think of well-being and they instantly think, oh, let's chuck these benefits at it. Don't get me wrong, benefits have their place, but that's probably where people go wrong. It's not about, yes, we've got this tick, yes, you can have a yoga class, yes, you can have a mindfulness app, tick, 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 tick. Why are you not feeling any better? Well, that's because you're still working me 90 hours a week. I don't know what I'm responsible for. There's no clear accountabilities and my job doesn't have any purpose. That's why I'm still not great. So, you've got to get that right. The benefits then become a bonus and the cherry on the top, if you like, to facilitate the rest of the well-being situation. So that would be the one thing. Get the basics right that don't cost anything in your culture. I could go on for hours on this question, but conscious of time.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and again, it's really down to building those fundamentals. And also, I think on top of that, moving from reactive to proactive and actually being able to start to consider what you can do. It's often when we actually kind of take wellbeing as a concept, it's easy to move into both the benefits and the reactive aspects and really the value added stuff, that the roof of the house. But I see so many companies with a really, really lovely roof, but no foundations and no real house to put the roof on top of. And it's such a challenge, but those foundations, like Debbie said, workload, sustainability, clarity of role, values and how they're communicated and how they're lived, a real ability and sometimes quite often management capacity and capability to really kind of support that structure, because quite often the managers are laying the bricks. And it really, then it's about looking and, the different aspects. There's a lot of, I suppose, buzzwords almost in wellbeing a little bit. We hear resilience, we hear mindset, but so often they're kind of that building on top of those, because ultimately at the end of the day, business processes play a significant part in employee wellbeing. And to really not look at how those processes connect, and even down to, employee relationships, collaboration, and how they're fused together. That the overall dynamic plays such a big part, because you could throw so many amazing interventions into an atmosphere, they're simply not going to have an impact. And then wellbeing doesn't work for us and people become more resistant to it. And we never want that situation for our businesses.
Sorry to jump in, everyone. It's Ellie again, and I've just got another couple of audience questions that I'd love to squeeze in because it's really relevant to what you've all been saying about the workload piece and also the cost of living piece. So if I just read these two out. So in a sector like social care that is struggling financially, how can we frugally invest in wellbeing? The social care sector has some of the most needy staff who worked throughout the pandemic, and their workloads are ever increasing. Flexibility is a huge ask in social care as packages are based around the needs of the individuals cared for. Increasing salaries and perks cost money from an already tight pot of funds, and recruiting staff in a sector where many are leaving to go into other sectors is difficult. What advice do you have? And then just to follow on from that, because it's within the social care sector as well, what are your thoughts around certain sectors experiencing difficulties, such as health and social care? These strategies work well in sectors where you have the luxury of prioritising and dropping tasks, but this doesn't always work in my sector. I am working with a number of clients who are really struggling and staff are leaving when there's no control over filling vacancies.
Should I start, having run a health organisation prior to coming to Mental Health First Aid England? I mean, it's tough, isn't it? And this is, you know, PhD and long conversation stuff. But I think this is where, when I talk to friends and colleagues and family members who work in those sectors, they're saying, you know, people say they care, but there isn't a single action which demonstrates they understand. And so you start them with cherries rather than with the cake, and you know, so some of the simple things like, you know, could the wages go up 20 pence an hour or whatever it is, and I know all these things cost, but actually, is that better than investing in X, Y, and Z? And what does it feel like to believe that you are understood, and that even if there are constraints around there, that managers and leaders are doing all they can to make progress? And I don't have the answers about how you do that, but that again is about those honest and open conversations, isn't it? And really trying to find ways to ensure, you know, what I hear a lot is people saying, well, they spent as much on us as they did on agency staff, and you know, all of these sorts of things, which of course, when you are a manager or a leader, the options that you have to take in order to deal with immediate questions. But even if people understand why you've got to make those, and so often resentment or feeling unwell, you know, when work makes you feel unwell because you don't understand what's happening, and you feel disconnected from it and misunderstood and taken for granted. And I think Debbie said, you know, conversation doesn't cost any money apart from the time it takes to have those conversations, and it is actually your best tool. And one of the things which we know works best in that is, rather than working something out and then communicating the decision, is involving people in those decisions, finding ways to have people to help you to deal with the conundrum and the difficult situations that you're in. It doesn't change it, doesn't necessarily change the outcome, but I know how often my answer is often different than my staff's and team's answers, and so getting it right is about understanding from the different perspectives. But yeah, no easy answers, but I think it is conversation is key.
Yeah, and I think one of the other things is, don't underestimate the role recognition plays in terms of gratitude and, you know, thanking people. So if they are in that situation where, you know, you can't deprioritize something, that recognition that someone is going over and above can actually go a long way for people to feel valued, which has a positive impact on their well-being. So it might seem glib, you know, and ideally, you know, increased number of people and, you know, reduced working hours and all those kind of things would be better, but actually at least some recognition and acknowledgement of the work that's being done does play into improving people, how they feel about what they're doing, and also, you know, trying to understand you know, these people often in social care go in as a vocation. You know, they are a particular, I take my hat off to every single one of them, and I think that recognition piece partly comes with that for those that have it vocationally, but also understanding what you can offer them in different methods, or in terms of you know, learning opportunities or growth as a way of recognizing it in different ways. But yeah, I'm not I'm not an expert in that sector, unfortunately, so I wish I could give you a magic wand for that one, but as Simon said, that's like a university degree's worth of potential research and conversation there.
Yeah, and I just think to kind of bring it to a close, it's incredibly tough, and massive respect for everyone in that sector, because just being able to deliver that level of care in what are sometimes quite volatile circumstances is admirable in itself. I just think quite often for those who are very much at the front of delivering that care, the simple question for them quite often is, am I cared about as much as I care for my service users? And just, you know, Debbie's recognition, appreciation, opportunities, just that communication piece again, it's so valuable. And, you know, being able to feel like you are cared for when you are caring for others, especially because they're so passionate and obviously, you know, very purpose driven, that can sometimes lead to challenges around burnout and that, you know, compassion fatigue element too. So yeah, just trying to find ways to communicate that care and action in that where possible.
Really sort of great words to end the conversation on for the sector that's going through some tough times as well. Definitely check out our salary squeeze webinar that was hosted a few weeks ago, because that did have quite a strong focus on social care as well. But we have come to the end of the webinar now, so thanks so much to everyone who tuned in, and a huge special thanks to our panelists. You've all been fantastic. Do keep an eye out from an email from GoToWebinar over the next day or so, because it will contain links to the slides, the recording and the full report. But other than that, thank you so much for joining. Have a good day.